Welcome back to the program, Hockey Central, on the air Monday to Friday, noon to 2. Around the table, Brian Burke. It is Truculent Friday after all. Justin Bourne and Anthony Stewart. We are standing by. No, we're not standing by. He is there. He is the commissioner of the National Hockey League. Gary Bettman joins us on the program now. Gary, thank you so much. I know you wish it was under different and better circumstances. So do we. But thank you for joining us this afternoon. How are you?
I'm always happy to be with you guys, but I couldn't agree with you more. I'd rather it be to review last night's games. But we are where we are, and this is an unusual, difficult time to say the least. Yes. But we're all going to get through this.
And we're of the same attitude. I'm curious how the what the timeline was, because as we were, me and Berkey with Elliot on the air on Wednesday night here on Wednesday Night Hockey, following what was happening with Utah and Rudy Gobert and how the NBA shut it down so quickly. What was the timeline in your office and, with the NHL? The Rudy Gobert situation happens. NBA decides to suspend their season. What happens with Gary Bettman and everyone around him?
Well, what we had throughout the last few weeks been constantly analyzing what was evolving, what the situation was, and what our responses need to be, and what all the possible contingencies could be. We were exploring whether or not it was going to reach a point in time we needed to completely shut down, whether or not we needed to take a break, or whether or not, or how we would continue to play, whether it was in all empty buildings relative to fans or in partially empty buildings, depending on what local jurisdictions were doing. But in all of those scenarios, and in every discussion I would have, either internally or with clubs, particularly owners, I always ended with the caveat, you understand that if a player tests positive, we're done for the time being at least. And so I always understood that to be the case. When an NBA player tested positive, and I was immediately aware of that, it was clear that the NBA was going to have no choice. And my immediate reaction was, for all of us, all the leagues, all businesses, we were kind of reacting. And I said, at this point, it's inevitable that an NHL player at some point is going to test positive. We're not going to get through the current season as scheduled, and we might as well just shut down now, so that we don't get to the point that we have to react the way the NBA did and have a building that was full and players not taking, the court or the ice as appropriate. And so it was at that point I said, okay, we got to take a pause. And I immediately made arrangements for a conference call with the governors for the next day. There was no doubt in my mind as to where we were going to be, but there was no reason for me to, at that moment, say we're taking a pause. I spoke to the governors. Brian has been with me enough to know how I operate. And so we scheduled a conference call for, early afternoon to accommodate the West Coast. And we had a brief conference call. I answered a lot of questions in terms of what the world was going to look like once we took the pause. And the minute the call was over, we issued the release and said we were going to stop playing for a bit.
Brian?
Hey, boss. So what's next? And I know we were talking about this before we went on the air. What's next? What's a drop dead date? I'm sure you can't answer that, but what do you envision now? We just wait and see, right?
So, well, you were with me enough to know. So we have an internal task force that has been meeting, 2 times a day, in the morning and the afternoon, and we are exploring every contingency. We're looking out in the calendar to see, well, what's the last day we could be playing under other scenario, and then backing it up, and what are our options in the time frame that's available. And we're doing all sorts of modeling, whether it's completing the existing regular season as is and then a full playoffs, or whether or not, based on time constraints, we're going to have to make adjustments and do something different, novel, creative. And we're constantly reanalyzing and reworking that. So that's something that, it's like a puzzle, right? And you've got to fit the pieces together, although the interesting part of this puzzle is you don't know exactly what it's going to look like when you're done. But our responsibility to our players, our teams, most importantly our fans, is to make sure we're doing everything right and making sure, that when we come back, and I believe we will at some point because I'm an optimist, it'll be when it's appropriate and when it's safe, so that everybody can be comfortable.
I'm sure this is a big part of the work that you guys are putting in right now, but when you say when it's safe, what are sort of the minimum requirements, or what needs to be met for hockey to return? What would make you guys comfortable?
I think those are in charge of our governments, either in Canada or the U.S., both at the federal level, the state level, and the local level will tell us, right? We're not equipped to say, the pandemic's over. There are going to be medical people at the highest level who are going to tell us all, and it's going to relate. Listen, I'm in New York. I'm in the office. We have everybody working from home, as do most large businesses now. And I think that's what you're seeing all over. Schools are closed for the next, few weeks throughout North America. And so as those decisions have been made, it's based on the advice of those in charge, and we'll be reliant on them telling us as well. All we can do is make every conceivable plan so that we're in a position to react appropriately.
I can attest to that. It sounds like I'm sucking up to the boss here, but I can attest to what Gary's saying from working for him. They've got building availability dates on every building in North America. They've got every contingency plan for it. I have complete confidence in that.
Well, thank you, Brian. But you know the drill. You've been here.
Yep.
It's listen, I assure you, I was actually yesterday afternoon, I had like 15 minutes to just do nothing, which was an incredible thing to have. And I look up at the screens in my office, and there were games on showing fans excited in the crowd. It was highlights or something, and I got really sad. I mean, as tough and as difficult and the health risks and everything that we're worrying about, we're all going through collectively, and it's not just about sports. It's about our way of life. This is very sad.
You mentioned contingency. How far have you guys looked ahead as a whole? Have you made plans, for the draft, for free agency, for training camp, or even the schedule? You don't look that far ahead at this point.
No, we know that those are issues that have to be addressed. So we've had a conversation. What do we do if you still can't have a public gathering by the time of the draft? When should the draft be? Do we do it by a conference call? I mean, that's part of and I'm not saying we will. I'm just saying you explore everything. I will say, because I saw a question came up, I'm not focused on having something wrong with next season. I mean, obviously, if there's a pandemic still going on next fall, we've got bigger problems than that. But whatever we do with this season, I'm expecting next season to be a normal season.
How much of this, and with the commissioner of the NHL, Gary Bettman, how much of this is being done in conversation with the NBA? And ultimately, the question that I'm getting at is, if the NBA is back, is the NHL back automatically, and vice versa?
Well, we all have to make our own decisions. I assume we'll both be relying on the same medical information. I think the real issue where there needs to be some focus, and we've already agreed to do it, is to the extent we're sharing buildings, that we're making sure that we're not tripping over each other as we're trying to schedule when we both come back. My guess is when it's safe for us to come back, it'll be safe for the NBA to come back, and vice versa. But we each have to do our own things as we do. We both have to make our own decisions, although the overlap's interesting, because one of the factors in my decision Wednesday night, which we announced on Thursday after I spoke to the board, was there were a couple of teams that were in the visiting team's locker room in a building where the Utah Jazz used the same locker room within 24 hours. Washington was in Madison Square Garden the next day after Utah played there, and Tampa was in both Boston and Detroit the day after the Utah Jazz played in those cities. And so, again, I concluded it was only a matter of time before one of our players tested positive if we continued to play. And so we decided, again, we were going to get ahead of this.
This is, as you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, a unique situation for the NHL, given that reality. And we do understand that, as in the NHL, we all know, wants to complete some type of regular season and then proceed with the playoffs. At this point, though, how open is the NHL to being creative with what happens in the playoffs, being creative with how you conclude the regular season? Is everything on the table at this point?
Well, first of all, this is a unique situation for all of us. It transcends the NHL. It transcends sports. I mean, this is, hopefully only a once-in-a-lifetime thing for all of us. As I indicated, and I hope I did a few minutes ago, we are looking at every contingency and what's doable. So, yes, everything for consideration is on the table. It doesn't mean that any of those are going to happen. I don't want to speculate as to which direction we're going in. We are analyzing every conceivable option that is available to us, and that's not something that's static. In other words, what's an option today, there may be different options, fewer options, more options, who knows, next week. And so my hope and expectation is that we can finish the season in some form, award the Stanley Cup, and then be able to move on feeling that we accomplished that goal of finishing the season for our fans.
Being joined by the commissioner of the NHL, Gary Bettman. You mentioned that you had 15 minutes of free time yesterday, and that was a foreign feeling for you.
Actually, that was an exaggeration. I don't think it was that long. I think I just glanced up at the TV screen in between calls.
So just on a personal note now, and listen, of course, there's still league business to do, and you're a very busy individual. But what are your days like now?
Well, I've been in meetings nonstop. We sent everybody home, which is what most large employers are doing, and people are working from home. I and a number of my senior staff are in the office, and we had a meeting, and I've been in meetings nonstop all day or on calls, either with business partners or in a couple of unique special cases for people we like a lot on the phone doing media.
And we appreciate that. When you go through a situation like this, and you're right, this isn't just a hockey issue or a sports issue. This is a life issue. Things change irreparably. We learn from it and we move forward, and then it becomes part of our reality. In your estimation, and I know it's still early, how does the NHL change long-term because of this situation?
That's a great question, and I haven't had time to reflect on it, but my visceral reaction is, in terms of our protocols with respect to health and safety issues, we're really on top of those things. I mean, we're dealing with a situation. The coronavirus is something that transcends everything, and what we have to continue to do, because we self-evaluate across the board on everything we do on a regular basis, making sure we're doing the right things to keep the people associated with and in our game healthy.
Mm-hmm. And everyone appreciates that, certainly. You've been generous with your time. I know you're busy despite the fact that the league is on pause. We thank you for your time today, Commissioner.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope you and all your listeners and all our fans and everybody stays healthy.
We appreciate that. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, boss.
Bye-bye.
There he is, Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL.